Hi, my name's Brandon. I'm a marine biologist and an artist, and welcome to Nature Meets Paper, the place where we go on an adventure to discover the world of marine biology. I love sharing my passion of the oceans and its creatures with you through art. You clicked on the blue thumbnail, which means you're here for How to Art. This segment where I show you how I do my art. I post every Tuesday focusing on art and Saturday focusing on science. Today we're going to be discovering how I painted the Fisher's Seahorse in watercolor paints. Brush is ready, let's dive in. This painting was done in watercolor paints as well as pearlescent paint watercolors. I just finished a detailed painting that took 2 weeks to finish, so I wanted to paint something whimsical and fun. I enjoy watercolors because it is completely different than using acrylics. Acrylic you can work in layers and go from mid-tones to darks, then to lights. Watercolors need to go from lights to dark. It is difficult to lighten up watercolor if you went too dark. I start with pearlescent blue for my background. The tank is boring, so I wanted to change it up. Pearlescent paint catches light and bounces it in fun ways. I use some light manipulating paint or material in all of my paintings. For my background, I use wet on wet technique, where I wet the paper before applying the paint. I use Fabriano Artistico hot pressed 140-pound watercolor paper. It is important to get nice materials for your canvas or for your paper. It will hold up and make the process of art easier. If you are fighting your materials, it takes all the fun out of art. There is some grass that the seahorse is holding on to. I use a mixture of yellow and green to lay down the first layer. I make sure my layers are all dry before moving on to the additional layers. Don't be surprised if the color of the pigment changes a bit during the drying process. If you use watercolors enough, you can sort of predict how it will behave. I move on to my first layer of the seahorse. I mix yellow and brown to lay down the base colors. For this part, I am still using wet on wet technique. And make sure it's a light color, you don't want to go too dark here. I move on to a dark brown for part of the seahorse immediately. This allows the yellows and browns to mix together in a soft, unfocused manner. I am adding shadows and texture to the seahorse to give it character. Once this layer is dry, I go back to the plant. I add highlights to part of the plant. I have a white watercolor paint that works really nicely. Then I work on darkening shadows on the seahorse. I'm not getting into tiny details yet. I leave tiny details for the end of my paintings. The thing to remember is that the first layer you put on is one of the lightest colors. You need to make sure your darks are dark enough and your lights are light enough. You don't want your art to look flat. Unfortunately, my camera stopped recording when I added bubbles to the background, so it just appears out of nowhere. I thought the background was too boring. Plus, it is fun to play around. I work from reference photos all the time, and I like altering my pictures in my mind and on the painting so that it has a little more character. It makes the art a little more interesting and fun to look at. I paint water and bubbles so often that I know how it plays with light and on other surfaces. I add dark blue and a touch of green to the bubbles. I let it dry, then I add highlights. The fun thing about the pearlescent paint is that it can almost disappear in some lights and then shine brightly in others. It creates a movement to my art that I can't recreate alone, or without this paint. I have started adding tiny details into texture dots to the seahorse. I don't know if texture dots is a real term. I can just make up my own term. But I'm adding dots to the seahorse that will lighten as it dries. This creates fun texture when you look at my paintings. I do this until I'm happy with how it looks. Once everything is ready for highlights and dry, I add my brightest whites in places that stick out or along the top surface facing the light source. I try to obtain an aspect of realism in my paintings. I work from reference photos that I have taken. I can always change things, but that is how I paint. I will call this painting finished. Thank you so much for going on this adventure with me. It means so much that you take time out of your busy schedules to watch this video, to discover something new, and to get to know me a little bit better. I also like to thank you for being an active member of this community by leaving likes, comments, shares, and subscribing. It all helps this channel grow. I sell art and merchandise on my website, as well as teespring.com. Links are down in the description. Happy creating, and God bless.